Why do all of these fighters use the same gun? The Houthis took over a container ship with them. The Taliban, Afghanistan. The Chechens used them to fight for independence. Cartels to push their product. The Somalis used them to shoot down an American helicopter. The Nicaraguan Contras to fight the Sandinistas, who were fighting back using the same weapon. And Liberian warlord Charles Taylor gave them out as gifts in exchange for loyalty to him. This is, of course, the most iconic weapon on Earth, the AK-47. Originally a Soviet creation, it loosely translates to the Automatic by Kalashnikov 1947, named for the gun's designer Mikhail Kalashnikov. Since the start of its production 75 years ago, the AK-47 has become the most widespread firearm on the planet, used by dictatorships, rebellions, militias, and paramilitary organizations on every continent except these two. It has been the most produced gun in history, with roughly 100 million of it and its variants made, while the number 2, the M16 and its variants, stand at around 8 million made. It's the standard weapon in over 100 countries, while also being the first true civilian weapon, and the AK has become the deadliest weapon ever designed, with millions killed at the end of its muzzle. The AK-47 is more than just a gun. It's a symbol of anti-Western ideology. It's on the flag of Mozambique, on the banner of Hezbollah, Lebanon's primary insurgency group, on the flag of Colombia's historically largest left-wing rebel group, and on the seal of Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps. If this gun never took over worldwide rebel groups, marketing yourself as anti-establishment would never have been as easy as picking up a certain variety of gun over another. Why this came to be is a story of black market dominance. It's a little odd that this Russian gun ended up at the forefront of nearly all of our modern fights. It doesn't have that high of a range, and it often doesn't even shoot straight. There are plenty of other automatic rifles that could have taken its spot. The Fedorov Avtomat, Mauser MKB-42, or M1 Garand, just to name a few. The first major advantage the AK has over any other rifle, though, is ease. Absolutely anybody can learn how to use an AK-47. As Military Times elegantly puts it, the gun can be field stripped and reassembled by an illiterate 8-year-old Ugandan after less than an hour of training. I would have used a nicer example, but you get the idea. It is just so easy to repair, unjam, and maintain. It can be shot while standing, kneeling, sitting, or squatting too. Not only can it resist any form of weather like dust, extreme heat, freezing, rain, mud, but it's what they call soldier-proof. With as few as 8 moving parts slickly designed to reduce malfunction, it is truly hard to break it via human error. For militant groups often made up of dissatisfied, disorganized, and untrained youths, this gun is a perfect choice for their style of fighting. Accessibility over precision. The conventional story of its design goes something like, Kalashnikov was born a peasant in southern Siberia where his family farm was taken away by the Soviet collectivization program. As a teen, he was deported to a small Siberian village, falling in love with tinkering the guns he used to hunt. He was conscripted into the Red Army where he worked as a tank engineer, but injured during the 1941 Battle of Bryansk against the Germans. When recovering, he heard other soldiers complain about how often their rifles would jam, and poof! Kalashnikov had an idea. The AK-47 was ordained into this world by this genius tinkerer and given to his country to defend itself. An ardent socialist to the very end, Kalashnikov never made a single dollar off of his world-changing invention, only receiving 11 Soviet awards and the title of Lieutenant General. And while this made a great proletarian story to tell Soviet children before bed, it's only half true. Yes, Mikhail was born a poor farmer, eventually becoming a Red Army engineer, but it was not only his genius that gave us the AK-47. In 1943, the People's Commissariat of Armaments held a design competition to create a new Soviet automatic rifle. Kalashnikov, who joined the competition in 1946 along with his wife Ekaterina, Vasily Lyuty, and Vladimir Daikin, all worked as a team to meticulously design this new weapon, going through dozens of incremental iterations, consulting with soldiers along the way. For example, the trigger alone was redesigned 10 times before the AK was finally completed. As you may have guessed, it did win the design competition, becoming the Soviets' official rifle in 1948, with production starting the following year. Use was initially slow to take off. Only 8,000 were produced in 1949, but eventually, through even more tinkering and tweaking, tens of millions would be made. In fact, most of what we call an AK-47 is not an AK-47, but the AK modernized in AKM. This was made to give general improvements to the production process, to make it more accurate, reliable, lighter, and to lower its costs. The gun entered service in 1961, becoming the dominant variant of the AK family. Similarly, the AK-74 improved upon the design again, becoming widely issued at the end of the 70s. The ease and reliability of the gun was perfect for such a multilingual empire, with no shortage of illiterate conscripts. The AK-47, AKs in general, didn't get their foot in the door for economic reasons, but rather political ones. The Soviets, in an effort to export its ideology and influence around the world, first gave out the license to manufacture the gun and technical expertise to certain fraternal countries, supplying it to rebel groups around the world at the same time. So countries like Poland, Bulgaria, North Korea, and China were able to make this gun for a low cost. Iraq, Iran, Egypt, and Cuba were also large recipients and producers of the gun, eventually becoming regional suppliers in their own right. Once supply chains were built to send the AK around the world, 4 events cemented its place in history. The first was the Hungarian Revolution of 1956. This was a revolt against Soviet rule, quickly crushed by 60,000 troops. Typical Soviet Union stuff. However, it was remarkable in that it was the first conflict which brought the AK-47 to the global stage, used by Soviet troops to kill thousands of protesting Hungarians. Nice one. Then, the Vietnam War proved its worth. While the Soviet-backed North fought mainly with AKs, the US-backed South used the M16. This gun jammed, corroded, and always needed cleaning, while the AK worked fine in the dense, hot jungle environment. It's said that some AKs were found buried in the mud for months, but ready to fire after wiping it off and giving it a kick. The popular perception of the well-trained American army losing to inexperienced farmers likely gave the AK-47 its largest marketing win ever. The third event, though, was much more of a tangible win for the gun: the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. While only Soviet forces used them at the start of the decade-long guerrilla war, US President Jimmy Carter made one of the most important decisions in the history of the AK and authorized the CIA to supply the anti-Soviet Mujahideen forces with hundreds of thousands of Chinese-made units. In terms of the amount of arms received relative to its size, Afghanistan had been the highest on Earth. Throughout the course of the war, as many as $2 billion worth of AKs flowed through Pakistan up into Afghanistan. The CIA actually monitored the AK's prices in Lahore and Peshawar black markets to measure how many guns would inevitably slip away from their directed traffic. After decades of wars and bombings of Afghanistan, many AKs migrated themselves along with the Afghan diaspora around the region, and Afghanistan would eventually become one of the largest nodes in the global arms trade. And finally, when the Soviets succumbed to internal pressures and split into 15 separate countries, the second largest military buyer and supplier stopped existing. What was left was a massive stockpile of guns and no real demand for them to stay in the former Soviet Union. Almost 80% of the small arms stockpile left the bloc. While variants of the AK-47 were incorporated into many countries' official arms catalog, after 1991, the AK escaped the communist world. it now had to prove itself in the global free market as a commodity rather than a political tool. We've already established 3 of the 5 pillars which I think the AK used to achieve total black market dominance. These are accessibility, durability, and path dependence. Accessibility meaning the little amount of training required to use the gun. You can think of this as a low variable cost for a business. Durability in that the guns stick around a long time after they're made. They're good for as long as 50 years after creation. That's a very long time. The AK does not need to stay in the same hands or even the same region throughout this time. It could be used to suppress a rebellion now, then to aid one 20 years later. And by path dependence, I'm talking about the glut of Soviet AK-47s that gave it an early market lead. Maintaining this dominance is much easier than catching up to a larger competitor. But that leaves 2 pillars out: low entry barriers and the gun's demand. There are 2 types of markets in which the AK dominates: the gray and black markets. Gray meaning things which were legally acquired but illegally sold, often bought by a rich arms dealer with fake end-user certificates and shipped somewhere the seller was not aware of. Victor Bout, the Merchant of Death, often did this to supply, say, Angolan rebels with Bulgarian guns by showing them an endpoint of Ghana. The black market plays an even larger role, being the flow of goods illegally sourced and illegally distributed. From those gray market AKs reaching Angola, they can then be spread in the African black market, essentially laundering it from a legal Bulgarian AK to an illicit rebel-controlled one. Much of the gun's trafficking comes through this ant trade, with individuals and loosely affiliated networks buying or maybe stealing these guns to transport to paying customers. And just like any other commodity, the price will fluctuate based on demand and entry barriers into the market. Historically, you could buy an AK for anywhere between the price of a live chicken to some blood diamonds to various drugs to tens of thousands of dollars, depending on the time and the region. 4 factors which play into this are: 1. Political instability. A country with more conflict is going to have a higher demand to participate in that fight, driving the price of an AK up. In fact, that price can be seen as a signal as to if the region expects conflict in the future, much like how a stock's price can be seen as an expectation of the company's future value. For example, AKs were trading for only $300 in Lebanon in 2005, but just weeks after the assassination of ex-Prime Minister Rafik Hariri, the price shot up to $600 as many people expected future chaos. Second, the distance between buyer and seller will increase its price, not only in terms of physical distance, but also how many regional markets it has to jump through to reach its destination in the segmented global market for firearms. For example, an AK could sell on the black market for around $500 in Detroit, but hop over the border to Windsor, Canada, and it starts selling for $1,000. Go even further to Toronto, and you can sell that Blickum for $2,000. Similarly, the easier it is to get through a border, the more porous it is, the lower the price will be on the other side. This is why it's so easy for AKs to move through Africa's corrupt borders. Any demand for guns on this continent will be pretty easily met by supply from somewhere else, like Malian insurgents fighting with Gaddafi's old guns. Third, the more a government can regulate the gun market, the higher its price will be. And when a government falls, assuming there's no conflicts creating local demand, its capacity to govern vanishes and the AK's price will fall. Gun smugglers will just find higher profits elsewhere. That's why the gun saw a mass exodus away from the Soviet bloc towards countries like Somalia and Yemen. What are these countries gonna do? Regulate the trade away? And lastly, it all depends on local perceptions of quality. Like any other good, people need to prefer it to its competitors to buy it. But because of its usability and excellent marketing campaign, this is no hurdle, especially for groups just starting to organize. Why this specific gun is the one to dominate this trade is not only the result of its utility and Soviet grand strategy, but because of the global market structure. As soon as a winner is chosen, previously produced guns will circulate around, especially in and out of less regulated war zones, and there will be no need to constantly update yourselves with new types of guns. The fixed costs are already spent, and training a soldier on a 40-year-old model is much cheaper than finding a dealer, buying a new gun, and then training the soldier on that. We would need to see some pretty serious innovation in small arms to upend the AK-47's dominance, something that radically improves upon its reliability or cost or even its branding. Until then, we'll keep seeing wars fought with the same weapon over and over, changing hands every time a government falls and a new challenger pops up. I think we'll see the first rebellion of the 22nd century fought with AK-47s. Maybe even the first one on Mars. If you like this video, consider following my new Instagram or giving this channel a big subscription. Thanks.